Okay, hi guys, and welcome to today's show. Today we are going to be reviewing the Omega 300, the Watchco. This is the no date, one of the most iconic Omega dive watches of all times. Probably one of the most iconic dive watches, period. Very, very excited. I must give a quick shout out to my good friend Scott H, who has entrusted me with his watch, his beloved Seamaster. Massive thank you to him. I apologize it's taken so long. He sent it in. I've had this watch since March, since late March. I just so behind on the watch reviews. I am actually starting to catch up, and of course as I catch up another 4 or 5 watches arrive, but there's nothing I can do about that. This is a watch channel. What am I going to do? I've got to keep up with content, right? So anyway, first of all, before I get into I've got to do wristwatch check. I am, of course, wearing the Squale 152, the Azzurro. Look at that. Absolutely love this watch to bits. Actually, the 300 has made me yearn for the kind of retro chic, vintage nostalgia of this, even though it's brand new. So is the Watchco, which we'll get into. You can hear that bracelet. Yeah, so the Seamaster, long overdue now. I don't personally know anybody with this particular watch, so it's a completely new experience to me. Very fascinating history. I kind of went into it a little bit in the review. We'll go into that in just a second. The Omega Seamaster, even though I don't currently own one, is quite an important watch to me. I've owned 7 Seamasters in total. Thank you, NYPD. Thank you. I'll just carry on. It's New York, what am I going to do? Yeah, so I've owned about 7 Seamasters. My first luxury watch was actually a Seamaster. I know a lot of you might disagree. Oh, it's not a luxury watch. Well, listen, to me it was luxury. I didn't have much money at the time, and it was my first kind of quality, iconic Swiss watch. So Seamasters will always have a kind of important place in my heart. I don't currently own one. I've owned the GMT, the new coaxial ceramic, the chronograph, the mid-size, the Bond 90s one, the vintage one as well. So I really do kind of know my contemporary Seamasters, so it's really nice to get to know one of the ones that the granddaddy of them all, the godfather of the Seamasters. Anyway guys, I'm babbling, rambling. Let's change perspectives now and have a closer look at this amazing watch. Today we are looking at one of the most iconic dive watches of all time. This of course is the Omega Seamaster 300. Now we've talked about Submariners. I had some experience with the 50 Fathoms in Las Vegas, but today finally we have a look at one of the greatest and most iconic of the Omega divers. Now this is the reference 1660-324, and this is the no date version. Now before we get into this review, I must quickly explain for those of you unaware, this is a Watchco. What is a Watchco? Well, let me quickly explain. It is a bit of a controversial subject. What happened was a company in Melbourne called Watchco, they had an official account with Omega, and they stockpiled a whole load of Omega parts specifically for the Seamaster 300, because Omega produced a surplus of these parts, especially cases, hands, all the rest of it, because this is obviously a diving watch and they expected it to get bashed about in use of what it's designed for. So Watchco cleverly stocked up on all of these kind of huge giant stockpile, and then started assembling, sourcing kind of donor movements, if you will, and putting together their own Omega Seamaster 300s. Now there is quite a big argument in the watch community. Is it a Franken watch? Is it official? Is it, it divides opinion. But today we're not going to be discussing the pros and cons of a Watchco. Well, I mean, we should mention obviously a Watchco nowadays it is getting more expensive as parts start to run low, but to get your hands on an original vintage Seamaster from the period, this is a watch from the 60s, they go for, I saw one at Christie's go for about 5,700, very, very expensive, and they're all beat up. But this is a way of getting, this is all the original parts, entirely Omega. Everything is Omega. These are all what's called NOS, or new old stock parts, and I mean, you can tell when you feel this. This is 6 months old. It's crispy. Strangely enough, if you took this to Omega, they would actually service it, because it is, at the end of the day, completely all Omega. However, it's been assembled by a third party. This particular one has been lent in by a good friend of the channel, my friend Scott. He has a very impressive collection, and he just had to get a Seamaster. He's had a thing for them forever. He's very much a dive watch kind of guy. He served in Afghanistan, and he wore his, I think it was a Rolex Sea Dweller he was telling me about. To complete his collection, he always loved the Omega Seamaster, as we see here. So for him, you know, I don't think he wanted a vintage one. He got this Watchco last year, I think about August last year. So let's talk a little bit about the history of the Seamaster. Well, the Seamaster actually came into existence at the early part of the century, especially in World War II. The first Seamasters were very, very dressy, and they were issued to the British Royal Air Force. They looked much more like a dress watch. They're not the kind of iconic dive watch that we recognize today, with the big hands, the larger sizes, basically what you see before you with luminescence and all that. Obviously, water resistance at that stage was very rudimentary. They didn't even have screw down crowns or anything like that. That came much later. The first real proper dive watch that really set the benchmark, really set the levels of that everything after it has been compared to, obviously, was the 50 Fathoms in 1953. The year later, the Submariner came out. Now Omega had to catch up, so in 1957 they released and kind of updated the Omega Seamaster, and that was when the reference 166024 was born. It was quite different for its time, because it had a 42mm size, which at the time was huge. I mean, these days it's quite normal, but back then watches were a hell of a lot smaller. They had tritium, these big sword hands and all the rest of it. Also, they had a Baker-like bezel. So basically what we've come to see in the dive watch today. And they were based on the caliber 565 movement. And then we're entering, you know, the 60s, and Omega really came into their own. In fact, I think a lot of purists will argue that that was Omega's heyday. That was the peak of their existence, really. You know, obviously the Speedmasters started to come out, and the Moon watches and all the rest of it. So a really important time for Omega. And then two really significant kind of events happened in the Seamaster history. In 1963, Jacques Cousteau's diving team, actually used Seamaster 300s in the pre-Continent 2 dives in the Red Sea. And this is before Jacques Cousteau famously started using the Plo Prof that he is so often associated with. Then in 1966, the British Ministry of Defence, actually in collaboration with Omega, issued a whole bunch of Seamaster 300s specifically for the British naval and terrestrial forces. These are recognized usually by a little T on the dial that designates it as the tritium versions. These were specifically designed to specifications dictated by the MOD, Ministry of Defence. Two really important events in the history and heritage of the Omega 300. So let's actually review this particular one here. I'll get the dimensions out the way first. Now, Scott, please don't panic. I have put sellotape on the end of these. The diameter actually is, it says 41.5. We got a thickness of 12. Lug to lug is 48. Lug width is 20. So the size and scale in today's standards is actually pretty small, but back in the day this was massive. You got to remember how small watches were during the mid-century. It's a little bit larger than the pre-ceramic Submariner, but strangely enough, we're smaller than the ceramic sub, obviously because it's got a more slender case. So we have a bi-directional bezel here. The bezel actually has luminescent inserts in the Bakelite. And while we're on the subject of the Lume, let's have a look at the Lume shot, because it is a really impressive and very cool Lume indeed. So let's change perspectives. As you can see, extremely impressive. And one definite advantage of having the Watchco is that the Lume is all going to be brand new and bright and responsive. We got those numerals in the Bakelite, inlaid in the Bakelite, nice big fat chunky markers, easy to distinguish where 12 o'clock is thanks to those different shapes. Outstanding Lume, very easy to differentiate between the hands because of all the shapes. Just beautifully designed for diving. Absolutely outstanding. Really cool Lume indeed. Love it. Anyway, back to the studio. Let's have a closer look at the dial. Now obviously this is the no date version, and I really like the no date version because it has a very symmetrical, clean, crisp layout. We have 12, 3, 6 and 9 numerals, then these lovely chunky luminescent markers. The originals had a big triangle. These particular Watchco ones don't, because I believe the dials that they had access to are these slightly later dials. Beautiful, nice, broad sword hand. I love that little kind of arrow syringe style second hand. Now the sweep is kind of stuttery, and that's because inside we have the 5-5-2 movement. It's not the most smoothest sweep in the world, but it's a really great movement. Scott was telling me that it's incredibly accurate, hasn't even been serviced yet. Watchco seem to do a pretty good job of putting this together. Everything, like I said in the beginning, is completely official and Omega. Movement itself was a donor sourced movement, so it was probably from a different Omega. That the 5-5-2 movement can be found in a lot of Omegas. It's the successor to the 551, which was actually COSC certified. I don't know why they didn't certify the 552, but regardless, it is a really great movement. The sweep of the second hand is a little bit stuttery, and that's because it operates at 19,800 vibrations per hour. The power reserve is quite an impressive 50 hours. Of course, we got, if we undo the screw down crown, we have manual wind, obviously, and it does feel very nice and smooth. If we pull it out all the way, we can set the time. Doesn't seem to be hackable, which is a bit surprising. My first experience of this particular movement, a bit new to me. It's a 24 jewel movement. You can get this particular watch from Watchco. There is a date version. Date comes with the 565, and that came a little bit later, I think. The 552 has actually been in use since the 50s. It actually predates this particular model. It's a very solid, reliable, and fairly common, so it's not going to be that difficult or expensive to service. And the interesting thing is about these Watchcos is that you can actually take it to Omega. They will service it, even though it wasn't bought over the counter officially by Omega. It's a bit of a kind of paradoxical, strange situation for a watch, and you know, it does cause a lot of discussion in the watch world. I really am not quite sure. You guys can discuss that. Let me know what you think down in the comments. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. Is a Watchco a real Omega, or is it it's not a Franken watch in the sense that, you know, it's a hodgepodge of parts from all over. I mean, it is all official real parts, so it's a bit of a tricky subject. Anyway, we have this beautiful domed, I mean, look at that. If I put my glove behind that beautiful domed acrylic crystal, absolutely gorgeous. It does have a luster and look to it that sapphire just doesn't have. And look at that case. We have that beautiful 50s. I mean, yeah, it came out in the 60s, but the styling of it is still very much, its heart is still very much in the 50s. It reminds me of the curves on a Cadillac of that era. The finishing is what we've kind of come to know and love of, just like Rolex has that oyster case that is so familiar and in so many of their models. The Omega kind of have the same thing, this very typical. I mean, the way the lugs come down, the lovely contrast between the matte finish on the side and the high polish on the top. Funnily enough, opposite to the Rolex Oyster cases. But beautifully done all the same, and really sharp edges. This is one advantage definitely of getting a Watchco, is that it's not going to be over polished. You are getting that that original shape. You're getting to enjoy it almost like as if you bought it in the 60s. So really cool. The polishing is quite simple. We've just got high polish everywhere except for these beautiful brushed sides and on the back to kind of give contrast to that beautiful hippocampus logo. Just very simple. In fact, I think more tastefully done, and this is why the Seamaster is just so iconic. If you look at all iconic watches, they're usually much more simple, much more minimalist in design. It's just very classic, tastefully done, and I think it will always look as stunning as it does now. The quality is there. You do feel that this is a luxury watch. You do feel that, strangely, even though it is obviously a tool sports watch and designed for action and adventure and all the rest of it. But I think that's why these are so desirable. Is you're getting that Omega brand name that we now associated with luxury, but you have the adventure and the romance and the mystery and all the connotations of the dive watch that Jacques Cousteau's team wore, that was issued to the British military. All these really cool things. Not a lot of watches have as much depth and lineage to them as this particular one, and it just makes it so much more desirable. And just, yeah, let's say it, it's a cool watch, really cool. We have here the 1171 bracelet. Of course, it has just a very cheap clasp, signed Omega there. Even the Rolex clasps of this period were flimsy and just stamped and very basic. Omegas certainly have come a long way. The end links are the 633 end links, so very same as the original. We have, of course, the Hippocampus Seamaster on the back there, all beautifully done. Certified high pressure waterproof. Of course, 300 is 300 meters. I mean, I don't even have to explain that, do I? Screw down case back, lovely little signed crown with the Omega logo. I love this cog style edge of the bezel. It really makes gripping it, and because it sits slightly above, I mean, look, it looks like a UFO, doesn't it? It sits slightly above, it's very easy to operate. My only kind of criticism is that it's not the most refined feeling thing, but we've got to remember this is from the mid 60s. It's not fair to compare it to my my 21st century Submariner. It's very far from perfect. The bracelet is I mean, just look at that bracelet. It's flimsy, it's really tinny. The clasp is stamped and kind of cheap feeling. There's no solid end links. Hasn't got that fine level of engraving that we see in contemporary Omegas. The bezel is a little bit kind of, doesn't actually even line up. It lines up pretty well, but it's kind of a little bit off. The operation of it it's not even hackable. There's a lot of negatives to this watch, but because of its iconic nature, because it's so beautifully made, because it has this charm, that appeal of that era, its kind of prestige and heritage of its day, you're willing to forgive it. You're willing to forgive all its negatives because it's just such a beautiful thing. It really is, despite all its negatives. But I mean, at the end of the day, what watch is perfect? I haven't found the perfect watch. Even my Submariner has its shortfalls, No watch is perfect. Like no person is perfect. It's imperfections that give it character. I do love the case. The case is probably my favorite thing about this watch. I love how the bezel sits and this domed acrylic crystal, which obviously is going to scratch like anything, but its charm. It's got that X factor. It's got that appeal. It's got that throwback, that romance, that so indicative of its age. It's still an icon. It's a beautiful, beautiful watch, and Scott, you should be proud of it. It's a lovely asset to any collection. And to be honest, yeah, if you haven't got 5-6 grand to buy the vintage beat up real thing from the day, then a Watchco, I think, in my book, is absolutely fine. It's just as good as a vintage one, or one that was bought in the 60s officially by Omega. I understand the appeal of it. I understand, I mean, this bracelet is ridiculous, but I'm dying to put it on the NATO. Let's just do a quick wrist shot. Dying to put it on a NATO, but as you guys tend to hate on me a little bit for putting everything on a NATO. But it wears beautiful. The bracelet, considering it's so cheap and tinny, is very comfortable. I haven't sized it. I don't want to size it because it's not my watch, and I don't want to risk damaging it. But it does wear beautifully because it's not the most tallest of watches. Sits very handsomely, very comfortable. It wears a bit like a Speedmaster. I mean, its case is kind of similar. Just a quick size comparison. If we put it next to the Squire, see how big the Squire is. Yeah, and that's a 42. It wears more like a 40. It's actually, let's say it wears like a 41 to be more precise. So just one quick last look at the dial, nice and close up. We've got Swiss made at the bottom, Seamaster 300 in that beautiful italic, iconic font there of the Seamaster. Look at all the little marks and scratches on that acrylic. It does give it character, and this is a watch that, Scott, I hope you do wear it, and you want to bash it up, you want to get scratches, and you want to give it even more character, and then it will be just like the vintage ones of the 60s, only in a little bit better shape. What an outstanding watch. Okay guys, I'm going to wrap it up there. Let's take it back to the studio. Before I go, please let me know down in the comments your thoughts, opinions, queries, all the rest of it. I always love to hear and get feedback from what you guys have to say. Also, your favourite Seamasters. Which are your favourite Seamasters? I would love to hear about that as well down in the comments. Anyway guys, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very, very much for watching. Please don't forget to give this a like if you enjoyed it and found it useful. It really, really does help me. And as always guys, I'll catch you in the next one. Okay, ciao.